since PIPSO was coming, and also to our development minister.
2 weeks. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to Fiji. Those of you who've travelled, of course, to Nadi, and also, of course, a warm welcome to everybody else who's attending. I'll be very brief, but I'd like to probably highlight two key features or 2 points of discussion that I assume would have an impact on your discussions regarding your strategy. Obviously, the main issue about PIPSO is about connecting the private sector to markets, connecting the private sector to each other. We do not, of course, in the Pacific, like some other parts in the world, have the luxury of having access to readily available markets, nor do we have the luxury of having very large pockets of population around our market base. You know, as I put into perspective some years back, your facilitator was also as a PS for communication at one point in time, whilst being PS for public enterprise. You know, in India they connect 10 million new mobile phone connections a month. We don't even have 10 million people in the Pacific Island countries, probably close to it. And bulk of that, about 7 or 8 million, comes from Papua New Guinea. So that puts it into perspective. The kind of markets, when you go to global and international meetings, you'll find that the larger countries, even continents like Africa, their discussions are completely out of kilter with the realities that we have. So that obviously is a significant challenge for the Pacific, where you have countries spread over vast ocean expanses. You have very low market numbers. You do not necessarily have the economies of scale. Your ability to compete or have a competitive environment is invariably limited because of the fact that you have low economies of scale. So it makes the work of the private sector and your ability to attract private sector into your countries a lot more difficult. And that is the reality in the Pacific. And I think we always have to recognize what are the limitations that we have in the Pacific to be able to then find the solutions. By highlighting the challenges, you're not actually saying that there are no opportunities. But I think it's critical to understand where we are coming from. Similarly, we of course have the challenge that economies of scale flows on to issues such as freight, accessibility to freight, the price of freight, our ability to meet various international standards that is required to be able to trade with other countries, in particular with the international market, and to be able to resource those entities that have actually given the certification is another issue. What it does say, though, is that there is therefore it's critical for us to be able to learn to collaborate with each other. You know, because we don't have the economies of scale, we have to be able to collaborate with each other. Now, if, for example, every single Pacific Island country had to set up each and every different agency that's required for you to be able to meet various certification requirements of other countries, you'll find it very, very difficult, because to resource it, to find the people to resource it, is extremely expensive. So what are the ways that we can, for example, provide opportunities for those countries without actually compromising the standards required of you? I'll give you a very local example of it. For example, in Fiji, we have a backlog of cases pertaining to employer-employee grievances. We had only 2 employment tribunals. In the budget that was just referred to earlier on, we provide for 2 more tribunals, one to be placed in the west and the other one to be a roving one. So it gives easier access, in going to various urban centers and rural settings. Now, in the same way, there's perhaps opportunity within the Pacific to have regional certification agencies that can provide those services to different Pacific Island countries without them having each country to have to establish a standalone certification organization. So these are the types of things that I assume that would be your points of discussion to be able to ensure that you get into that market space. The other, I think, issue that is very important to understand is that, like I said, we have limited resources. We therefore have to be able to identify what is our niche. There's obviously a certain peculiarity of your country, certain peculiarity of your market, your ability to produce something. That needs to be obviously be honed upon, and for you to be able to utilize it to the maximum. There are certain things obviously that we do in the Pacific. There's certain products, whether it's herbal, whether it's some other type of product that we may produce, that you're then able to market. It does not necessarily have to be a completely different product. It can be from the fact that it's coming from your country or from this part of the world. One of the things that we have tried to do, and we're still going through the process, is, for example, mahogany. We were lucky that the British, back in the 1950s, decided to plant vast tracts of mahogany forests. It was, basically just sold, but never marketed in the way that to say it's pure Fijian mahogany. Most of the mahogany that we do plant and export, or that the land on which it is planted on, is indigenous owned. It is one of the largest planted forests in the world. It's not virgin forest, so it's not indigenous. But you are then able to market it in such a manner to say, because you're not actually cutting down virgin forests, that makes you different from the virgin forests that are being cut in South America and other parts of the world, where they're actually cutting down virgin forests. So your timber should actually have a higher value, because you should not be able to cut down virgin forests or indigenous forests. That's how you're able to differentiate yourselves. So I would assume that there would be those points of discussions that you would use in your strategic plan. Overall, of course, as has been highlighted, we're quite willing to help. I know a few years ago, for example, we provided assistance to our Commerce Commission. We had a request from the then Solomon Islands Minister, because Solomon Islands faced a lot of issues regarding price hikes in basic products, regarding anti-competitive behavior in Honiara in particular, and some of the outer islands. So we did send a team over from Commerce Commission. We are quite happy to provide that type of facilities. There are certain, obviously, capacities that may exist in Fiji that you may want to tap into. We're quite happy to facilitate that. We have also recently, climate change obviously is very, very important to all of us within the Pacific. It has a very direct impact on our ability to not just interact with the outside world, but also be able to interact with each other. And we have always said that, for example, accessing climate fund is a bureaucratic nightmare. It is really a bureaucratic jungle, to be frank. So we need to be able to build a capacity within our own people to be able to know how to access those funds, to be able to know about the jargon that exists within the climate fund finance world. So UNESCAP has actually come on board with us. You would see in our budget we've made some seed funding, allocated some seed funding, approximately about $200,000, where we are going to set up a secretariat within the Ministry of Economy, and then have informal training or formal training sessions, but also informal gatherings of Pacific Island people. Whether it could be some from your ministries, it could be from your equivalent of the commerce, chambers of commerce. We want to bring people in for them to be able to understand how to access these funds. The other issue, of course, and I think it is very, very critical for us to have a regional collaboration. When you get out into the sort of climate finance world, there are two issues, as has been highlighted in the Paris Agreement. One is that funds are available for mitigation, and funds are also available for adaptation. Now, for Pacific Island countries, generally speaking, we need more funds for adaptation as opposed to mitigation, because we do not really emit that much carbon. Our carbon footprint is almost negligible. But at least I can say for Fiji, our carbon footprint is 0.004% of the total carbon output in the world. And I'm sure many of the other Pacific Island countries would be even lower than that. So the point is that we need funding for adaptation, because we are at the cold face of climatic events precipitated by climate change and greenhouse emissions, etc., global warming. So how do we access these funds? And not just that, how do we actually have what they call bankable projects? Now, you talk about, a lot of people come and talk to you about climate fund, finance is available, etc. And invariably, there's also a lot of soft loans available. But the reason they say the Pacific is not very good for that is because we don't really have bankable projects. What is a bankable project? A bankable project, of course, again, has to have the economies of scale. So there are many European companies that want to set up solar farms. They love to do that. But they don't want to do it, they don't want to have 30 solar panels. For them, it needs to be a very large scale. So one of the issues that we're also discussing with UNESCO, with the Secretariat we've just formed, is to able to allow the Pacific Island countries, and PIPSO actually can take a lead role in this, for us to be able to create a bankable project. So that could mean a solar power initiative by putting 6 or 7 countries together. And suddenly you get the economies of scale. So you then go out as a regional, PIPSO could even be used for that, would go out as a regional body to say, we want to set up, 100 acres, it could be tantamount to 100 acres of land for solar panels. Then they take you seriously. So they work out the logistics. But if you suddenly go and say, well, for Tuvalu we only want this much, in Fiji we only want this much, they're not interested. The banks that provide the climate finance funds, they're not interested. They want large-scale projects. So that's something that we're quite happy to also work with PIPSO and provide that, that level of advice and also the connectivity. The other point that I think is very critical, we in the Pacific, generally speaking, have not been very good with data collection. We have not very good data collection. We're not very good, therefore, consequently, very good in data analysis, because the accessibility to raw data, accessibility to the various methodologies of measuring things is not very well done. Therefore, we find that, if I can speak to Fiji, we don't have that right level of connectivity that we should have if we had the availability of data at all levels. And I think all of you would agree with that, and maybe that's an area that we'd like to, also provide some assistance in, or PIPSO can work with, because data is critically important. And I'll leave it at that. We've got, for example, in Fiji next year, we have our census. In the past 2 years, we've increased funding to the Fijian Bureau of Statistics by over $1 million every year. We're not only providing funding in terms of carrying out various surveys, but also providing funding to increase salaries and also to build a number of resources, human resources, within the Bureau of Statistics. So you get independent, assessment, independent analysis of data, and indeed the collation of data. And there is what we find is not much cross-pollination of data. Similarly, we need cross-pollination of data within the Pacific. Next week, for example, we've taken an initiative. We have this regular meetings that's held by Singapore regarding civil aviation. One of the most interesting things that's come out of it, the last meeting, was the ICAO has decided that countries that have a large carbon footprint from civil aviation must cut back. So all of a sudden, Pacific Island countries have a very large footprint from civil aviation, because obviously we need to travel via planes. We don't drive across to each other's country like they do in Europe or they do in North America. So one of the arguments we have, of course, is that when you measure the carbon footprint of any country, you simply cannot isolate it, in the different sectors. You need to look at the overall emission, because I'm sure many countries in the Pacific don't have large-scale, coal mines or coal factories or other factories. So as a result of that, Fiji was asked to host a meeting. So next week we have a gathering in Fiji, and Fiji is actually paying for this meeting, of civil aviation ministers from the Pacific. What we've decided also to tie in, to have an informal meeting with the Pacific Island ministers also. We've sent out invitations, and we're getting a few of them to attend this meeting. And the whole idea is, again, to have discussions along those lines. We recently were in Frankfurt with the ADB annual meeting, and I had the pleasure and the opportunity of meeting in particular, having long discussions with ministers from Tonga, Samoa, and Cook Islands in particular. and some of the other finance ministers too, and where they wanted to share, for example, some of the taxation changes we brought about in the past few years, for corporate tax, for personal income tax, and how we have dealt with things like environmental levies and service turnover taxes. So we hope to use that opportunity in that meeting next week, which is going to be on Thursday and Friday, to eke out some of these issues and provide, we don't want to have meetings where people put up their flags and it's all very formal, and we simply want to have a bit of a Talanoa session about, many of these matters. So I hope, that you have a very good meeting. You obviously have very good facilitators here with you over the next couple of days. We're quite keen, obviously, to work with as many organizations as possible. The idea, of course, is, we in the Pacific also, having dealt with many organizations, people tend to become very territorial. I think you lose your nous if you become all very territorial about it. The idea is to take a collaborative approach to these things, because ultimately we need to look at our objective, and the objective is through your organization, of course, to enhance private sector capacity, connect you to the markets, and indeed, please think about how within the Pacific itself you have markets. There are some challenges, of course, at the moment. We have a bit of an issue with Papua New Guinea regarding the export of our chicken, and they regarding the export of their corned beef to us. But I think in order to have a free flow of goods and services, it should not be seen from a retaliatory perspective. It needs to be based on standards. And I think this is very critical. So if you have various quarantine standards, the exporting country must meet those standards. And similarly, if you are importing, you need to be able to know that what are the standards that you have placed on them, so the other parties can, have goods, free flow of goods and services within the regime itself. So I wish you all a very, very good morning and a very good 2-day workshop. Please note that we are here to provide assistance to you, and we look forward to seeing your new strategic plan. Thanks.